Hello，你好，欢迎回来，Welcome back to Wisdom Wednesday with Johnny Tiger. The date is April 5th, 2023. Now, when we look at the history of China, or 中国, as it is more properly known, China is really an epithet that's been stuck to the country and the people, since that's what Japanese people and white people like to call us, uh, since the last dynasty in uh, in China. Uh, Now, this may sound really confusing. It really is, because throughout history, China has not always been called China. During the Tang Dynasty, for example, then it would be called the Tang Empire. During the Song Dynasty, it would be called the Song Empire. During the Ming Dynasty, it would be called the Ming Empire. Uh, uh, and the Chinese people have not always been called Chinese people. For the most part, Chinese people come from the Han uh, bloodline. Yeah, I know. You guys are thinking about in the Mulan movie where the Han is supposed to be a bad guy. So I would say forget about the Mulan movie for a second, because everything in that movie, timeline, who's good guy, who's bad guy, all those things were either fabricated or really, really misused. Mulan did not born at that time, where the movie claimed. If anything, Fa Mulan was born somewhere around the Song Dynasty, so she would be nowhere near the Han versus Chu war, as hinted in that Disney movie, and the leader of the Han, Shan Yu, definitely in real history would have preceded Fa Mulan by almost 1,000 years. So just set aside the history that you get from Disney. So in real history, we're talking about uh, no matter if it's Tang Dynasty, Song Dynasty, Han Dynasty, the Qing Dynasty, uh, the Yuan Dynasty, uh, the Zhou Dynasty, every of those dynasties, China was not called China. Chinese people were not called Chinese people, right? So, like, so the name of the country, the name of the people would follow whatever the dynasty was called at the time. The name China and the name the race Chinese did not become a thing, at least not for us as Chinese people, until maybe the last 200 or 300 years, when white people and Japanese people started calling us that. So anyway, this is kind of neither here or there. Got really nothing to do with what I want to talk about today. As I was saying in the beginning of the video, when we talk about the history of Chinese people, uh, now just for simplicity's sake, just to make it easier on me and for everybody else, we'll just call it China. We'll just call the people Chinese people, because that is the common language right now. But just understand this. When I talk about things that happened 5,000 years ago, even though I am saying the word China, that's not what the country was called. That's not what the kingdom was called. And the Chinese people was not called Chinese people back then. But I'm just keeping to using China and Chinese to make it simple for everybody else. Now, rather than we sitting here try to untangle what's the country supposed to be called and what bloodline people come from, because believe me, that alone can be very controversial, and it's worthy for at least 2 or 3 episodes. But it's going to be very headachy and complicated and probably boring for a lot of people. Um, I want to talk about something a little bit more interesting today. I want to talk to you guys about the first major war in Chinese history, the first recorded war, the first war that decided the fate of Chinese people. Now, when I say recorded, it's more like recorded in fables and storybooks and legends because back then no one really was keeping record. So there's no official historical record about this first war. In fact, most of what I'm going to be telling you today uh, kind of stride that line. It stands on that line between fantasy and myth and reality. Some of the stuff, some of the people really were there. Some of the stuff really did happen, and I'm going to try to sort of interject a little bit of comment to let you know what's historically proven, what's really were there, and what's probably just uh, folklore, probably what's just mythology. But nonetheless, uh, it's as interesting as historical stories, legends we hear, such as the uh, Trojan War and uh, the uh, other great Roman, Greco Empire warfare, Egyptian uh, warfare, and stuff like that. Okay, so a lot of those things, honestly, it just passed down from mouth to mouth. We may have historical evidence here and there, but a lot of those things were not recorded. So uh, I will I will talk, you will listen, and hopefully we'll all have a good time. Now, before we go into the story of the first war in the memory of Chinese people, uh, there's a word that you will hear very often when we talk about Chinese history. This word is Huangdi. Huangdi. Huang and Di. Huangdi. What does this mean? If you know a little bit of Mandarin and you know your Chinese history, you'll instantly recognize this word. Huangdi means emperor. Emperor. Now, the interesting thing is, Huang means yellow, and Di means emperor. So technically speaking, Huangdi should mean yellow emperor. Uh, But throughout history, for thousands of years, when Chinese people refer to our emperors, we call them Huangdi. So why is that? Well, this is directly tied into our story today, which was the first war in Chinese people's memory. This war happened about 5,000 years ago. Going back to about 5,000 years ago, there was uh, a lot of little tribes scattered throughout the land where we now know as China. But back then, there were not one kingdom, there were not one country. It was a big piece of land with a lot of nothingness, a lot of wild animals and monsters and dragons. Well, okay, maybe not the monsters and dragons, but in the storybooks, that's what they say. There were monsters and dragons. So, you know, if we want to make the story a little bit more interesting, you got to set disbelief aside. Let's go with monsters and dragons. And with the monsters and dragons, wild animals, there were a lot of tribes. Every tribe have their own totem. Yes, totem is not just a Native American thing. Totem is not just an African thing. Uh, Back then, Chinese people, the tribesmen that scattered throughout the mountains and plains, they had their own totems. Some of them had a totem as a bear. Some of them had a totem as leopard, and some of them had alligator as their totem, elephant as their totem. Yes, back then elephant was really everywhere in China. Um, One of the interesting little factoid that I'll interject here is that I mentioned this back when I talked about the Chinese zodiac. Uh, One of the greatest totem back 5 or 6 thousand years ago was actually pig. Chinese people worshipped pigs back then. Um, this is why the Chinese character for home is built around the word for pig, because back then people believed that the only uh, thing that make your resident qualify as a home is if you have a pig style, pig pen. You can have somewhere to keep your pigs. And if you don't have pigs, then it's not a home. It's just a shack or just a slum or something like that. So that's just a little bit of an interesting factoid when it comes to totem for Chinese people. Pig that rank last in Chinese zodiac. Back then, pigs would actually be like the most worshipped, most adored animal in all the animals in China. Uh, some people say, no, that doesn't make sense. Shouldn't it be dragon? Well, no, not quite. Dragon didn't come into effect until a little bit later, near the end of our story today. But we'll get to dragon. So anyway, as I was saying, there were many, many tribes and no unity throughout China back then. Gradually, the tribes started to form alliances, and they found enemies and friends. And in the end, the various tribes formed three major factions. One of the factions was led by a person named Yan Di. Yan Di. Now, if you have checked out the Johnny Tiger Experience podcast in the past, you will probably remember Yan Di from one of the episodes when I told the story of the guy who invented farming and herbology and Chinese medicine for Chinese people. Yes, that is the guy. That is the Yan Di we're talking about. So, as I mentioned in that story, Yan Di was a very distinguished looking individual. Even when he was born, as a baby, he had horns on his head and he had translucent skin, so you could see all the organs in his body. Now, luckily for him, rather than taking him out back and drowning him like he's some kind of evil demon or something like that, people in the village decided, wow, this guy is so unique. He must be God sent. He must be a gift from the God. And in fact, Yan Di grew up super strong and smart, and he had the greatest constitution of all times. That things that would have killed normal people, like poison normal people, and make people sick, would only make him uh, minorly uncomfortable. So he utilized that special power, that great constitution, to go out into the wilderness and try out different kind of fruits and vegetables and herbs, and taught his people how to grow them, how to cultivate them, what's edible, what's not edible. And it's because of that a lot of the villages started learning how to farm, learning how to grow fruit and vegetable and grain, and how to harvest them and trade them for other goods and services. So these villages uh, gradually gathered under Yan Di's banner, and they formed the Yan faction. Now, the Yan faction is quite important to our story, although they are definitely not one of the major players. So we are just going to uh, minorly talk about them today. We're going to pass them by a little bit today, even though Yan is definitely a very, very important element in Chinese history. Because without Yan Di and his inventions, Chinese people wouldn't have had thousands of years of great farming and cultivation and landscaping and be able to have a great uh, medical practice in Chinese herbal medicine. So Yan is very, very important to Chinese people. It's just not overly so in today's story, which is about the first war in Chinese people's memory. The second faction was led by a guy by the name of Huang Di. Yes, if you recognize that, that is what I said is called Emperor or Yellow Emperor. Now, back then, that wasn't a title. It was literally the guy's name. His name was Huang Di. Huang Di was born around 2704 BC. So Huang Di and Yan Di and the third character we are going to come out pretty soon. These three people they really did exist. However, obviously they probably didn't have horns on their head or uh, uh, super strong constitution or translucent skin and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of those attributes probably were added on later to make them more unique and relatable and memorable, dramatic. But these people, as far as people went, Yan Di, Huang Di really did exist. Okay, so Huang Di grew up to be a great hunter. He knew his way around the woods and forest and river and ocean, and he knew his way around animals and how to hunt them, how to uh, 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 tame animals, how to tame horses and stuff like that. So uh, gradually, the tribes that focused more on hunting, trading, merchandising, crafting, traveling, and fishing gathered under Huang Di's banner, and they became the Huang faction. So now we have Yan faction that focused on growing food and farming and trading in food and preparing food. And now we have Huang faction, who basically were the nomads. They were people that hunted and foraged and gathered and fished and camped out in the wilderness. They were the great horsemen. They were the great hunters and trackers and rangers. These villages under the Huang banner had totems such as leopards and bears and alligators and lions and tigers, while the uh, tribes that were gathered under the Yan banner were pigs and rooster, sheep and goat and dog and so on and so on. Now we come to the third and probably the most mysterious faction of all three of them. This third leader was called Chi You. Yeah, I know that this is even awkward for me, and I speak the language. Chi is like CHI and then YO. Chi You. Uh, Chiyo was a very mysterious historical character. Again, like Huang Di and Yan Di, Chiyo really did exist. However, the real Chiyo was probably nowhere similar to what people portray him to be, but almost everyone could agree on whether it's a legend or historical record or historical evidence as found by scientists is Chiyo did exist and he was the greatest military leader of their time. Chiyo grew up really, really poor but he was strong and he was brave and he was kind to his people. Zhi was the guy who would be in the front of the battle. He would be in the front line, leading his people from the front, and he was a great tactician. He was up until this great war. He was undefeated in every encounter. He led his people, who basically were the northwestern barbarians. Uh, they grew up in very harsh, very cold, very poor condition, but Chiyu, uh, relying on his bravery and tactics, led his people down south, down east, and established their own faction, the third faction, which is basically the faction of Chiyu. Um, Now, some of the interesting legends around Chiyu, like I said, these are legends, so probably not historical fact. Uh, it says that the reason that Chiyu was unbeatable in battle was that he has 8 arms, and he's about 10 feet tall and has a head like a bull. So I guess he's like a minotaur before a minotaur was even a thing. Uh, so this is like a giant with a head of a bull and have 8 arms, and he's more muscular than 10 men put together. And he's stronger than uh, hundreds of men put together, and he had impenetrable skin, so no weapon that was made back then could penetrate his skin. So, I mean, yeah, great story, right? I mean, that definitely sounds like a dangerous, deadly foe, especially when you think that he is also one of the greatest tacticians. He's smart. So this is not only a big, strong monster of a dude with 8 arms and impenetrable skin. He's also one of the strongest, smartest tactician of his time. And so no wonder people were having problem defeating him. Now, like I said, this is just legend, of course. Now, the real Chiyo was still very strong. The real Chiyo was known for his bravery and tactics, but I'm pretty sure he didn't have 8 arms or a bull's head, or stuff like that. Legend also said that Chiyo came from a very, very rare genetic strain. Him and his 80 something, I think it was like 84 or 88 brothers uh, or siblings. Uh, yeah, I mean, just that boggles my mind a little bit. Can can this person really had like 88 siblings? I doubt it back then. But anyway, that's how the story goes. So it said Chiyo and his 88 siblings, they didn't eat normal people food. They had to eat metal. Okay, so these are not just people that have impenetrable skin or super freaky physique. These were people that could eat metal, that they eat metal like other people were eating rice. Yeah, okay, definitely scary. So now the stage is set. We have our three factions: the Huangdi faction, the Yandi faction, and the Zhiyou faction. So a quick recap: Huangdi's faction is the nomad, the huntsman, the fisherman, the travelers, the rangers, the hunters, the trackers, the trappers, the people that deal in furs and skins and meat and all that. And the Yanди factions, people that were farmers and ranchers, they stay put and grow their food and trade in the goods that they harvest. And then we have the really crazy sounding Chiyo faction, which is made out of the northern barbarians. They were big and fierce, and they basically were monsters, and they ate metal rather than uh, food. So, like I said, that faction is the most mysterious because it has been so dramatized throughout history to make them sound monstrous. Uh, but I'm pretty sure that they were not nothing like that in actual history. Um, so, how it all went down? Well, there again, this is where legend and history differ. Uh, the legend went that because Shiyou's people needed to eat metal, so they demanded that the Yandi and Huangdi faction send them metal every year to keep them fed, because they didn't have the know-how to create metal themselves. Uh, they didn't know where to go get metal, how to forge metal, but they knew that Huangdi, because they were hunters and tradesmen, and Yandi, they were farmers, and some of them were miners. So Shi You's faction knew that the Yan and Huang faction had plenty of metals. So they demanded that the Yan and Huang faction sends them metal every year to keep their people fed. Now, the first few years, to keep the peace, Huang Di and Yan Di were okay with that. They were like, well, whatever. We have a lot of broken stuff, like broken parts and broken wagon, and things like metals that were no good. So these people, they're like, or recycle. They're like recycle. So if they want metal, we'll just send them our broken stuff, the stuff that we don't use anymore. That's fine. But as years and years went by, well, metal became more and more rare, and Huangdi decided, you know what? I'm sick and tired of sending them free stuff. They don't contribute to anything. So why do we keep feeding them? Let's just tell them we don't have any more metal and tell them to go find their own. And the legend goes that, well, you can understand when people get hungry enough, they get angry. Well, that's what happened to Chiyo and his brothers and his tribesmen. They uh, lost their supply of metal because Huangdi and Yandi stopped sending them, and they gradually started to starve. And when they got hungry enough, they decided, well, hell, if they're not going to send it to us, we'll have to go beat them up and take it. So Shiyu and his monstrous uh, tribesmen and family invaded uh, Huangdi and Yandi's territory, and the war started. Now, obviously, like I said, this is a little bit. Uh, this is more like the legend. This is the storybook version. Honestly, the real version uh, probably would be a lot more mundane and less about good versus evil. It's probably more about, uh, you know, they have land we want their land, or we want to hunt on their land, they won't let us, we go wipe them out, we can have their land. It's hard to say in real historical fashion who started the whole thing. In the storybook, it's Chiyo and his people that were the bad guy, but we need to take that with a grain of salt because, you know, it's always the winner that write history after all. Oops, I just gave the ending away. Oh well. Now the war itself, again, because there's no actual person keeping record of the whole thing, so we can just glimpse what happened from the storybooks and legends and mythology. So from this point on, most of what I'm going to stick to will be the myth version, partially because that's what's available, but also because that is the interesting version, right? Like if we look at how history went down, it's probably very simple, very boring. Okay, the three factions came together and they fought and killed a lot of each other, and then 3 days later, one side lost, the other two side won, and the end of story. So let's stick to the more story-friendly mythology version. Now, the war. it's very lengthy. There's a lot of interesting things that happened, and I don't have time to go through the entire thing because that would be an entire novel all on its own. Suffice to say, Huang Di was no match for Chi Yu, and Yan Di was no match for Chi Yu. I mean, the Chi Yu was like I said, like 10 feet tall, and had a head like a bull, and had 8 arms and impenetrable skins, and all his 80 something brothers were monsters just like him, and then they had a bunch of barbarians with them, hungry and angry, and probably every one of them had some kind of monster attribute as well. So these were very deadly people. Uh, the one downside was because of all the barbaric stuff that they did, all the cruelty that they have shown, they pissed off the gods so much that they had a very hard time uh, reproducing. Now, I have no idea how that works. Like, if you have a hard time reproducing, how do you end up with 80 something brothers? So maybe the curse was after them, or maybe they were not like real biological brothers. Whatever. Okay, I don't know. It's mythology. It's mythology. So anyway, um, so the first few encounters, Shi Yu and his barbarians and his brothers kicked the crap out of Huang and Yan's factions because Huang and Yan's factions were not used to warfare. They were not used to fighting creatures like these. And don't forget, I also mentioned Shi Yu himself was one of the bravest, strongest, best tactician of his time. So he's smart. He was outsmarting them, outmuscling them at almost every turn. Finally, Huang Di and Yan Di decided, you know what, we can't do this alone. We have to work together. We outnumber them. This is one of the few advantages we have. And also, we have better supplies than they do because they can only eat metal, while we can replenish ourselves by eating meat and rice and noodles, whatever. I don't know. I don't know what they ate back then. Uh, so just on a pure resources front, we out resource them. We have better resource than they do. Uh, so how do we do this? Well, Yandy said, because my people, we are farmers, we grow food, and we don't really go out and kill things. So we are not really that good on the front line. So Huangdi, you and your people, you are hunters. You know how to kill things. So you guys fight them on the front line, and we will make sure we supply you with equipment and strategies and food from the back. Uh, this way, we can work together and use our strengths to help each other. And that little alliance started to turn the tide of the battle. Uh, Huang Di's people started to harass Shi Yu's people from all sides. They were doing the hit and run tactic, guerrilla warfare. They didn't want to meet these monsters head on, and they just led them on wild goose chases all over the forest and jungles and land and marshes and swamps, and let them chase them and get them to be really tired because while the hunters led by Huang Di, when they got tired and hungry, they could just stop and uh, catch a rabbit or shoot a deer or something and replenish his strength. Shi Yu's people could only eat if they found metal. If they didn't have metal, if they didn't have metal, they couldn't eat. They just got hungrier and hungrier. Meanwhile, one of the major obstacles that Zhiyou's barbarians presented to the Yan and Huang alliance was that how do we beat these people when they have impenetrable skin? when our sword and arrows can't hurt them, how do we do this? Well, Huang Di decided, okay, well, then let's all switch our weapons to hammers and axes. We can't cut them, but they definitely will feel it when we hit them with blunt trauma, or drop big rocks on them, run them over with horses and wagons and chariot. So Huang Di, while trying to fight these monsters, also was inventing new kind of weapons and new ways of doing war so they could hurt these guys with impenetrable skins. And this worked until Shi Yu uh, decided, okay, well, they're not playing fair. There's two of them. There are two of them beating up on one of us. So let's get some help. So Chiyo prayed to their totem and brought down two supernatural beings, the rain god and the wind god. The rain god brought down great floods upon the world and started drowning the crop that Yan and his people were growing, so they couldn't supply Huang with any food. So Huang's people would have to fight hungry as well. And the wind god would create tornadoes and hurricanes, blow over trees and make road uh, uh, impenetrable, make the road hard to travel, and flood the plains so Huang's people couldn't hit and run and move around so easily. And this allowed Chiyo and his creatures to catch up to them and slaughter them in great numbers. Now, this was becoming a real serious issue for the Yan and Huang alliance. And now the foods were not growing, the crops were getting drowned, and the roads getting flooded, the trees were getting blown over, the tornadoes and hurricanes and um, massive wind, and so that made the horses unable to work and all that stuff. It just create massive destruction, and they were on the verge of being vanquished when Huang Di decided to, okay, if the other side bringing in supernatural help, we have to bring in supernatural help. So Huang Di did the unimaginable. He sacrificed his youngest daughter to the gods, asking them to send help. Yeah, the guy actually sacrificed his daughter. So anyway, uh, so the gods, touched by Huang's determination, sent down a creature uh, that took over his daughter's body. So the dead girl rised up as the first Hanba. What is a Hanba? Now we are going to sort of sidetrack a little bit because Hanba is a very interesting uh, mythological creature in Chinese mythology and history. If you read enough Chinese fiction, you'll probably come across this creature sooner or later. We won't go too much into details because we want to be able to get through today's story. Hanba is basically a zombie. Whenever there's a drought, whenever Chinese people get hit with a really bad drought, in the old days, the the holy people, the monks would say that it's because there's a Hanba being created. So it is said that when a corpse is buried under a certain condition, or if a person died with enough hatred in their mind, and if an evil spirit then finds this body uh, will eventually turn into a kind of a zombie called Hanba. Hanba has three eyes, so it has an additional eye in the middle of its forehead. When a Hanba opens its third eyes, even the sun have to avoid the Hanba. So it is said that when the third eye of the Hanba opens, the sun will going to eclipse, and everything will stop working. The land will go into deep, deep drought. No rain, no wind, nothing. The nature will avoid this creature. This is one of the most evil creature in Chinese mythology, one of the most powerful zombie in Chinese mythology. And even gods are afraid of it. And the first ever Hanba was basically what happened to Huangdi's daughter, the one that he just sacrificed to the god. So the god sent down an unholy spirit, took over the girl's body. The girl rose up, a third eye opened on her forehead, and the sun went away, the wind went away, the rain went away. Everything was blank. There's nothing. Like nature just boom, halted, dead still. So now, there's no more flood. There's no more wind that can blow trees over. And Chiyou's people were devastated. They were totally caught out in the open. They didn't know what happened. How come there's no wind? What happened to our wind god? What happened to our rain god? Uh, and Huangdi's hunters took this opportunity to invade and counterattack and devastate Shiyou's force. Now, this was far from the last major battle fought during this entire war. There were a lot of other battles with both sides calling up crazy, crazy creatures and inventions and stuff like that. But like I said, this would be an entire novel if you want to sit here and talk about the entire war. So we'll cut through all the meat and potatoes and fast forward to after many, many trials and errors, after many defeats and many victories, Huang Di and Yan Di finally were able to defeat uh, Zhi You, killing all of his brothers, and they finally captured Zhi You himself. Now, uh, let's jump out of mythology and go back to history for a second. When Huang Di captured Zhi Yu in real history, he immediately ordered Zhi Yu put to death. A lot of his people were opposed to that. A lot of his people say Zhi Yu is a great man. Zhi Yu is kind to his people. He's one of the greatest leaders. Why not let him work with us? Why not let him become one of us? But Huang Di was so fearful of Zhi Yu's popularity because of how he knew that a lot of people really loved this guy. So he ordered Zhi Yu put to death immediately, didn't even give him a chance. Okay? Now, back to mythology. When Huang Di and Yan Di captured Zhi Yu, they wanted to put him to death immediately. Yeah, just like the real history. But in this case, it's not because of popularity, it's not because of any of that. In this case, it's because they believe that Shi Yu is uh, cursed by the god. So they believe that if they allow Shi Yu to live, the god would continuously be angry with some people, with his Shi Yu's bloodline, which means monsters would continuously be born. So they wanted to end that. Now, when it came time to execute Chiyo, this was difficult. You know, axes wouldn't cut his skin, swords wouldn't cut his skin, arrows wouldn't pierce his skin, and even if you hit him with a hammer, Chiyo himself was so massive and so strong he barely felt it. So Chiyo, unfortunately for him, became the first victim to being drawn and quartered. Huang Di ordered him tied to five of the strongest horses in the kingdom, and he had the horses run at full speed away from each other. Eventually, even the great Chi Yu couldn't take the pressure of being pulled apart by 5 horses, and his body fell apart. And Huang Di had Chi You's head, arms, torso, legs all buried in different corners of the kingdom because he was so scared that Chi You was able to rejuvenate and put himself back together. That's how scared they were of Chi You. And this part was pretty much true in both history and mythology. Chi You was such a feared leader of men that Yan Di and Huang Di didn't want to take any chance of him getting a second chance. Afterward, Huang Di and Yan Di united all three factions under one banner, and the idea was Yan Di was going to be the first emperor, but Yan Di died soon after. He finally found something that poisoned him, even him, and he died trying some kind of new herbs, and I think he found like something like a nightshade or something, and then it killed him. Now we can actually look a little bit deeper in history, and we can't help but wonder: did Huang Di have Yan Di poisoned? You know, now that we defeated our greatest enemy, so now we want to unite the world. Uh, should I be emperor or should you be emperor? So it is possible that Huang Di tell Yan Di, "Hey, good job. Thank you for helping me out. You know what? Yeah, you should be the first emperor. I'll be the second after you. After you die, I'll be the emperor. How's that?" And then, oh, by the way, to celebrate, I bring you a glass of wine. Uh-huh. Yeah, you get the picture. Anyway, this is just conjecture. There's no historical proof for any of this. So anyway, Yan Di died, and so Huang Di became the legitimate first emperor of Chinese people who united all the tribes under one banner. Huang Di's wife was also said to be the first person who invented silk. She was the person who taught people how to raise silkworm, how to harvest the silk from the silkworm, and how to make garments out of silk. Now, before we end today's episode, let me quickly mention dragon because I promised you guys I'm going to tell you why dragon wasn't the first totem back then and how did dragon later become a symbol of Chinese people. When Huang Di was uniting everybody, he was trying to figure out, okay, what should be my symbol of authority? And then he said, well, I should be like, because I'm brave and I'm the first emperor, I should be like the king of beasts. I should be lion. And then he realized this wasn't going to work because now this basically meant the lion tribe, the people that worship lion, going to say that they are better than anyone else, and that gave them an unfair advantage. And all the other tribes were going to rebel eventually. And they said, well, how about I can be the biggest? I'll be elephant. Well, that also had the same problem. Now the elephant tribe thought they were better than everybody else, and other people were going to rebel. So in the end, Huang Di said, you know what, the hell with it. If I'm going to be the ruler of everybody, I'm going to have the attribute from every animal. So my animal is going to have the body of a snake, the mane of a lion, horns like a bull and a goat, uh, and teeth like a lion, and scales like a fish, and so on and so on. So he basically took a attribute from every animal, every totem, meshed them together, and that's how Chinese people came up with the dragon totem. So this is why Chinese dragon looks the way it does. I hope that this episode has been interesting for you. It was definitely interesting when I was studying up and researching to do this. Uh, I love mythology. I love stories. So I hope you do too. Thank you for checking out today's episode. I'll be back again tomorrow for some Toy Thursday with Johnny Tiger. For now, 谢谢 and 再见。